So look, I'll start recording. You guys need to interrupt me and tell me if you can't see what's going on. Um, so, what have we asked? I'm going to start at the bottom with this easiest bit. Identify which variables are correlated to rank. Okay, so one of the things I could do to deal with that is let me get my alternative universe data set. So I'm just going to use a slightly different data set. Okay, so I'll just share my screen. Share, Peggy, please interrupt if you have any questions. Now, I don't seem to be able to hear people, but I haven't deliberately muted you all. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Everybody seems to be muted by default. Are you able to unmute yourselves?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, fine. So as long as you can unmute yourselves to ask any questions you want to ask. So at the moment, you should be able to see the assignment overview page. And I'm just going to quickly run through this bit that we've done before on correlation and rank. So I'm going to switch to my Excel file. Now you should be able to see the Excel file. And please note that this is not your exact data set. It's very similar, but I've randomly sorted the data. So it's not the same as what you've had originally. So if I want to find the correlation between, what does it say? Identify which variables are correlated to rank, where one is the highest rank for the difficulty. Okay, it's supposed to be for the difficulty of playing the sport. So one really simple way I could do that is just to, I'll put it in a separate row, is just to write correlation in my spreadsheet, as you can see here. And in fact, I'll go to the top and I will freeze my panels. So I go view, freeze panes, freeze the top row. I'm going to go reasonably quickly, everybody, because you've got a video that's going to be available afterwards that you can rewind, pause, and play at your own pace. So I hope that's a good idea. So now all I need to do is come down here and use the Correll formula in Excel. So Correll, and it says returns the correlation coefficient. That's what we want. For everybody turning up, I'm just going back and doing the correlation coefficient that we've done before in class. And if anybody wants me to repeat it at the end, I'll repeat it at the end. But otherwise, it's going to be on the video for you. So I want the correlation with rank. So I'm going to start off with endurance. So I've selected endurance. So B2 to B41 is endurance. And I'm going to find the correlation with rank. So that's M41 to M2. So now I've got the correlation between endurance and rank, and I can find it's negative. And then I might try dragging that across, but I will find it does not work. And the reason it does not work is because we need to absolutely reference the rank column. So now that I've absolutely referenced the rank column, and if anybody's not sure about absolute versus relative referencing, so the dollar signs, either see the video that I'm going to upload late tonight or tomorrow morning about that, or ask me a question about it. But now I've got the correlation with rank, and I could rather than copy and paste, I could go equals and grab the titles and drag that across. And then maybe I should tidy it up a little bit. We don't probably need that many decimal points. And I might even insert a row. Okay. And now I've got a lovely, neat set of correlations. I'm just trying to put a frame around it. And I could either zoom out a little bit and take a screenshot, or I could simply copy and paste that into my Microsoft Word document. Now, the question said, identify which variables are correlated to rank. Now, maybe last time I read that as positively correlated, but it doesn't say that, does it? It just says correlated. Well, everything's going to be correlated to some degree. It's a question of how big the correlations are. Although interestingly, flexibility's come up with, okay, not exactly zero, but close to zero correlation. Anyway, which is the variable that is most highly correlated with rank? Total, although negatively correlated, because the total column is simply the sum of the other columns, not including rank. Oops, sorry. Now, am I on Excel? Which one am I on at the moment, everybody? I think I'm on the Excel spreadsheet, aren't I? Good. Okay. So I could redo the total column myself by adding up columns B to K, endurance through analytical ability, drag that down, and I've got the total. And you can see it's the same as the total on the left. And then the ranking is just the order of the total from highest to lowest. So the highest score in the table of total, is 60.66. And that gives rise to the lowest rank. So therefore, unsurprisingly, total and rank are very highly negatively correlated, because the higher the total, the lower the rank, right? The higher the total, the lower the rank by definition. That's how the rank's been worked out. So after total, ignoring the sign, the next highest correlation is with speed. So you can say that rank and speed are relatively highly negatively correlated. Now, that's one way we could do this. Another way that we could do this is to use the data analysis tool pack. So if you want to check whether you've got the data analysis tool pack handy, you go to File and then Options, and then you click on Add-ins and you choose Go, and then you select Analysis Tool Pack and choose OK. And once you've done that, under the Data tab up here, we should find Data Analysis is over here on the far right. So I click on Data Analysis and I choose Correlation. And this will give me a correlation matrix. So I now select my input range as being the named columns all the way up to rank, because we're interested in the correlation with rank. And in fact, we could include the total for that purpose as well, sorry. And then, yes, it's grouped by columns. Yes, I gave the labels in the first row. And then I'm going to send the output, which will be a correlation matrix, to a new worksheet. So let's just call that correlation. And there is my correlation matrix. I'm then going to tidy it up. Now, that is amazing. I did not know you could do that, Allens. You just drew on my screen. That's the first time I've ever seen that. Impressive. Okay, and there's more people here than I realized. So I'm sorry, I'm going back to do the correlation matrix. So if anyone has any questions, and if you want to draw on my screen, by all means do it. I didn't know you could do that, but go ahead. Anyway, please call out with any questions you've got. If you simply put them in the chat, I may not notice until you point it out, or I'm going to try to notice, but I may overlook it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly tidy up my correlation matrix by just editing it, let's say to 4 decimals. 2, 3, or 4. I reckon 3 or 4 is ideal. 3 or 4 decimal points for the correlation matrix. Then I might be inclined to align that to the right, make it a bit wider. I can then zoom out or zoom in when I want to take a screenshot. And, you know, I might have renamed some of the variables already here. I have, for example, coordination. I can make that a little bit smaller. Probably should match it with both. Now, by all means, if you have something to say, please do unmute yourself. But maybe if you don't have anything to say at a particular time, it's better to be mute, just because otherwise we're all hearing whatever it is you're doing. Okay, so next up, what I might do, although I don't think it works perfectly for our purposes, is conditional formatting. So I highlight the cells with an actual correlation coefficient in it as best as I can, like I've skipped the headings, and then I click on the Home tab, I click on conditional formatting, I choose color scales, and I want one where red is positive and blue is negative. Now, it may not work perfectly, but that's pretty good. So that's a pretty darn neat correlation matrix, I think. And so I could take a screenshot of that and I've got my correlation matrix. Or, although I know most of you don't need this, some people do, let me just very quickly also do it in exploratory. But any one of these alternatives is good enough. Okay, so where's the thing I was working on this morning, Colin? Okay, well, I'm going to start from scratch then. So we're going to do sports. So let me just, in fact, I might even leave it again. So I'll show you from the very beginning. Sorry, I'll have to switch software programs again. Exploratory, public. Okay, as soon as that comes up, let me share the screen. Has anyone got any questions at this stage? I mean, please also note, you don't have to be here if you don't want to, because you can watch the video later. I mean, I would encourage you to stay. I don't mean to discourage that at all. I would encourage you to stay and ask questions. But, you know, if you'd rather be doing something else and watch the video later, you don't have to be here for attendance purposes, is what I'm really trying to say. Peggy, was that you? I heard someone yell my name.
I have a question.
Please yell
out.
I
just wanted to know
yes.
The visualization about the part A. How many visualization we need to do? Is it total 3?
Let's have a look again in a second. Now, let me just quickly do this thing in exploratory, and then I'll come back and answer that question, Peggy, if that's okay. Only because I'm just going to have to double check the question. I don't know why exploratory didn't start for me. Okay, now it is. Okay, what I was doing just then was sorry, Sania. I'm sorry, I didn't want to do that. That's okay, no worries. Is this part A number 4? Yes, it was, Sanaya. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Sorry about that. But yes, that's correct. It was part A number 4. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to exploratory. And so I've got create new. And so I'm going to go project name, Sport 2. And then the next thing I'm going to do is click data frames. And I want to go to an Excel file. Okay, it looks like the share dropped out just then, did it? Let me just do that again. Something just went wrong with Zoom, I think, which is unusual. Where has Zoom gone? Presumably Zoom hasn't disappeared altogether. Okay, good. Do that again. Share exploratory. Now, where the hell's that gone now? Share application. Oh, here. Okay. So what I now do is I go to data frames over here on the far left of exploratory. And I click plus and I go to file. And then I could say I'm looking for an Excel file. And what I've got to do is tell it the folder location. if I want to change the folder location, I click on folder here and it gives me an option to change. But I want to do this for the alternative data set. So in fact, I want this one, data only, I think it says at the end. Unfortunately, you can't see the whole name, but I think that one says data only. So I choose import, and now it shows me all the file, all the variables, endurance, strength, power. We want to check that the sport one, which strangely enough, it's not showing us the name there. I don't know what's going on there, but we want to check that the sports are characters. In fact, am I on the wrong bit? Oh, I'm on the correlation matrix. Okay, that's what's gone wrong there. Sorry, that was odd. Well, I thought that was the data only tab. Okay, let me just make a new version of that file. Oh, the whole thing was I just did the correlation matrix, didn't I? That's the problem. I just made new sheets. So it's got confused about what data I wanted to load. So I'm just going to resave that file quickly. Just give me 1 second. Data 4000 data. I'm just going to say sports version 2. And I'm going to save it as an Excel workbook. Okay, and then I'm going to leave that and come back in. Sorry. Rightio. So I should be still at my exploratory, and I choose data frame again, and I choose Excel again. And this time I've just made a new version of the file, one with just one sheet, namely the data set. So not the correlation matrix, not the box plots, etc. And I choose import. Okay, that looks better. Sport, character. Sport, I trust you can now see it. Sport should be a character variable. Endurance, strength, power, speed, all the rest should be numeric. If one of them was wrong, we would click underneath and say, no, that's meant to be a date or a character, which is text, or integer, etc. So I think everything looks right here. Sometimes we do need to be careful because it gets them wrong, that this is character and the others are numeric. So I choose import, I choose create, and then look, it's immediately come up with visualizations and summary statistics. So we wanted endurance. So I could quickly take a screenshot and crop out endurance, which is the second variable in the list. And I could do the same with, what else did we want? We wanted nerve. I could take a screenshot and grab that. And we wanted coordination. I could grab a screenshot and crop that. So, that would probably suffice. What does it say? Not for the part 1, but use summary statistics. Anyway, it's one way that we could get some summary statistics. But what I really wanted to do was the correlation matrix in here quickly. So I now click on analytics, and I can then choose correlation, and then click on this choose, and it gives me a list of the variables, and I select all the numeric ones. So I can do that by, if I didn't have anything selected, let me go out and come back in. If I didn't have anything selected, I could click on the first one, endurance, then hold my finger on the shift key and click on the last variable or field, namely total, and then choose OK. And then I choose run, and you can see that I've got a correlation matrix, and I could say show the correlations. So I could put the correlations in there. Something to note about this is to take a screenshot of this correlation matrix. It makes a lot of difference how big your overall screen is. So you can change what the correlation matrix looks like by changing the size of your overall screen. And then in addition to that, you've got some choices under settings where you can say, for example, Where are we? Axis values. Show the values. Don't show the values. Didn't seem to make much difference, did it? Others. Well, somewhere here, I thought we could choose to show the numbers above and below the axes. I can't see where that is at the moment. Anyway, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I mean, you can turn the legend on and off. Oh, maybe it's because you've got to choose OK first. Show values. Anyway, you could play around with that, but you don't need to. There's a good correlation matrix. And once again, we should have exactly the same correlations. I've just done something to it. I don't even know how I did that, but I would take a screenshot of that if you wanted that one. So that's all we need from exploratory for now. So now let's go back, and I'm just going to go to a new page. So I'm going to go to a new page in the alternative universe Power BI file. So the main thing to notice about that, is that a question? No. Okay, let me just go back to Power BI, sorry. And now, Peggy, I forgot what your question was, sorry. Could you ask again?
About our assessment, they're asking us we need to do 3 visualization. So the first one, we need to do the which
so you mean of course part 2, don't you, of the assignment? Part 2. Part 2 of part A.
I think it's part 2. Sorry about that.
Yes. Yeah, that's okay. So I'm about to do something along those lines. So I'll show you some initial ideas and then we can chat further.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for the question. Okay. So the first thing to note, everybody, is, we've got filters, we've got visualizations, and we've got data. And over here under data, my sheet has been renamed to sports. So don't confuse sports, which is the name of all of the variables, or at least the name of the sheet that they're stored under. Don't confuse sports with sport, right? They're 2 different things. Okay, let me get my my DAX code up. So what I then want to do, as we could start off with some very simple things. So I click on the white space and I could choose, I want stacked column chart. Although I'm really just going to use a column chart initially. So I could choose stacked column chart, and then I could grab endurance and put it on the y-axis. And I could grab sport and put it on the x-axis. And it is automatically already telling me which are the best sports. But bear in mind, this is not exactly the same as your data set. I've changed it. So your final visualizations should not look like this. They should be different. Okay. So what we could do here to make this a little bit more interesting, just very quickly, is we could, for example, filter out all but the top 10. So one way that I could do this is to make sure that my filters panel is open. And then I go to my sport filters on this visual sport. Last week in class, I stupidly made another filter for sport. I was wrong in thinking that helped. It didn't make any difference. So instead, sport and endurance are already on my visualization and therefore already in the filters. So I can open up sport. And instead of basic filtering, where I could say, I only want to see those 3, 4, 5, 6 sports, right? Instead of doing that, I could go to top N filtering, where I'm only going to ask for, let's say, the top 15 sports. So I could go top 15, and then I have to say, as determined by what? How are you going to judge what are the top 15 here? Well, I want to judge it by endurance. But, if I was interested in something else, I could put something else in there. But I want it by endurance. So I drop endurance in there. For us, it doesn't matter whether it's sum of endurance, average of endurance, median of endurance. You know, for those basic choices, it doesn't make any difference. So I now go apply filter, and you can see that it's given me 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. So now I've just got the top 15 sports by endurance. So that's a step in the right direction to answering question. What did we say it was? Where's the power PDF gone? Compare and contrast sports that are high on endurance. Now, I could make this look a bit more interesting and do a few more things to it. For example, I could also improve it by saying rename for this visual and just saying endurance. I think that's better. But we don't know that this is the top 15 only, do we, by looking at that? So maybe I could add that into a title. So I've gone from build visual to format visual, and then I go to general and I've got title. So I could go open up title, and I don't think it was visible before, was it? Yeah, it's part of title is subtitle. So I could now turn the subtitle on and go under there and say top 15 sports by endurance. Or maybe that should even just be the title. But I thought it was worth showing you where we can edit the title and the subtitle. So that might be better as just a title, top 15 sports by endurance. Maybe we don't need the title and the subtitle. So the next thing I might do is go back. If you've clicked away from the visualization, your choices change. So go back on the visualization and go under format your visual. And I, for example, could add data labels. And now I can see the labels. I could go to columns and I could change the colors, or I could come in here and say, I just want to change the color of ski jumping to pink, dark pink or something. Or what we could do instead is go back to applying all, and we could use conditional formatting. Make the property change under different conditions. So I click on conditional formatting, and now I could, for example, say I'm going to customize it because I'm only showing endurance from about 6 to 10. So I'm going to say I'm going to make the lower value 6, customize the upper value 10. And, you know, just for practice, let's add yellow in the middle, although that's probably not going to be very effective. And then I choose OK. And now I've got a color-coded bar chart with conditional formatting. But, of course, in terms of interpreting it, it may be better if it's simpler and we don't have the middle color. And so now a darker blue or darker cyan indicates a better sport as far as endurance is concerned. So I could do that for endurance. I could do that just as easily for coordination. I could do that just as easily for nerve. You know, in theory, I could copy and paste this below. So I've just done Control-C, Control-V. And I could come over to here, and change endurance to nerve. So it may work out that it doesn't need too many changes, but at the moment, look, the colors are not coded from highest to lowest by nerve, but instead by endurance. So if you wanted to see the relationship between nerve and sport, while also knowing whether endurance is high or low, that's what this graph currently does. So it's telling you that gymnastics is very high for nerve, 8.4, but it's a relatively pale blue, indicating that it's pretty low, or at least not very high for endurance. But maybe that's not what we wanted. So we go to format the visual, we go to columns again, we go to FX, and I change endurance to nerve, because that's what the graph's about. Maybe also I change the colors just to make it a little bit more interesting. I think, in general, if you've got three very similar visualizations, at least make them slightly different colors, because it makes it much easier to see. Okay, so I'll finish this off quickly and do one more. So I've copied and pasted again. I go back to build my visual. I get rid of nerve. I bring in, not rank, sorry. I bring in coordination onto the y-axis. I then format the visual. I go to columns, and I conditionally format this, and I'm going to change the color to something else. So I'll go for pink, dark to light, and I'm going to make this, instead of nerve, I'm going to make this coordination. Now, the only problem is, notice, because, that's pretty good, I think, except we don't want some. But the other problem is, because I chose the subtitle and I've typed in my own subtitle, it no longer applies, given that the visualization has changed. So I'd have to go in here and edit my subtitle. Title. While I'm there, I can change this text to nerve by sport. And the subtitle, I can say top sports by nerve. And now look at this for another useful trick. If I now click on the third graph, I'm still in the subtitles and titles section. So I don't need to re-navigate my way through the menu. And so I can now come down here and say this is by coordination. And that should be it, I think. And so now we've got three pretty decent graphs by summary. Okay, for part one. They would be three pretty good graphs by part one, although I thought I'd forgotten to do something. I neglected to fix the title as well. I don't want it to say sum. I think in general, we shouldn't be saying sum unless it is a sum. Okay, so that's one way I could do that. And I think they're quite good, although unfortunately, my legend has still got sum. Now, this is being petty, but, if we could edit that and fix that, we probably should. So where do we go? Visual columns. Let's just see if we can. So sum of nerve, can we change it? No. So, but I did manage to get it there. Endurance. I wonder why that is. Okay, perhaps the trick is then that what we do is we come over here to the actual building of the visual and say rename sum of nerve just for this visual. And you'll notice over here, it now just says nerve. So I could come down to my third graph and go rename for this visual and say coordination. And now coordination is there. Now, again, I'm going, chat, is there something new? I am going fairly quickly. I'm sorry. Is this part, so what I've just done now with these graphs here, let me put a text box for you. Text box. This was essentially part A, part one. Bold. Where's my text box choices gone? Oh, over here. Okay, bold. Let's bump it up. Size 40. Make it white so that it's different to everything else. Under effects, make the background red. A1 is what I was just working on. Text boxes are a bit tricky to move. You've got to grab them by the edge. So I think that's one way we could do A1 to get the visualizations. We haven't got any summary statistics yet. But I think that's quite a good looking page, although maybe again, we don't need the title and the subtitle. So maybe another improvement I would make is I would come back to general, come back to my title, grab my subtitle and copy, or I'm going to cut that and put that instead into my title, and then I'll turn the subtitle off. And that's probably a little bit better again. So I prefer this to what I had a second ago. Okay, any questions about any of that before I move on? Okay, well, I must say it's great to have everybody's photo because that's going to give... Yes, sorry, fire away.
James?
Yes.
Okay.
Peggy, fire away.
I'm still asking about the part A. So
Yes.
for the second question, they're
Yes.
asking you use the summarized statistic and list three visualization, and then they mention boxing and wrestling. That means we need to separate different visualization, or just one visualization for each they asked. Like example, boxing, wrestling, martial art.
Okay, so that's part 2 and part 3, isn't it?
Part A, and then second question.
Yes, so part A, part 1.
Second question.
Yes, so I'll come to that. I'm not quite finished with part 1 yet.
Yep. Okay, sorry.
That's okay. No, don't be sorry. So I'll just go A1 version. So it's sort of like version 2, but 1. So now I'm going to do another one. A1 version 2, page 2, if you like. So I just want to show you some other ways we could do something similar. Right? Now, in fact, let's just check. What did we do last time? What we did last time was we used a top N by sport. What's it now? By probably the filter inherited. Let me have a look. Maybe that wasn't quite what we wanted, because if we look at the filter, my second and third visualizations inherited the same filter. So that's probably not what I meant to do. For the third visualization, I want the filter to be based on coordination. I forgot to change that. Apply the filter. And my second visualization, the sport filter, should be, now where is it? Why is that one disappeared? Top N. Did I already do that? Okay, anyway, I want it to be nerve. So nerve, I put that in here. And then I could ask for the top 10 or top 15, whatever I want. So that is better again than what we had before. It doesn't look as good, mind you, I don't think somehow, but it is probably closer to what we were trying to do. Okay, so before I then continue, let me just go back and have a look at my Word document with you just to see what else I suggest before we get to page 2. Now, did I get a screenshot of that? I think I did, but just to be sure. No, try again. Okay, sorry everybody, just 1 second. Okay, so if I now switch temporarily to my Word document, share. Okay, so back to the very beginning of my Word document. You should be able to see my Word document now. So I've got a chat about the meaning, and what we both decided was that we should create, okay, that's the next bit. But what we should do is create a visualization for each sport. And then another way that I wanted to do it was using this DAX code. So you should be able to see, you know, if you're at the top, if you're at the top, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong key. Here, you would look for where is AI chat on meaning. Okay, it doesn't look like I had a separate heading for the DAX. I thought I did. Anyway, I've got it here under 5. A1, rankings via DAX code. So I'm just going to go through this as well. So I need that code. So a lot of people were copying that in class, but it needed to be both lines. I mean, there's not actually a line break there. I don't think. It's just it was too big to fit on the one line. So I now copy that code and I'm going to go through this process quickly. So what I do is I go modeling. Oh, in fact, sorry, I need to switch share again back to Power BI. So now we should be back to Power BI. And what I do, if I was on the Home tab, I can't see new columns. Now, you can always get new columns from over here under the name of the sheet. The 3 dots to the right gives you more options. You can always choose new column there. New column basically means add something here like any other variable you've got there to start with. So I go to modeling and I go to new column. And then I want to overwrite. What it's saying is it's gonna call. I can click in here and zoom in a bit. It's going to by, okay, now I've lost it. I'll do it again. It's going to by default call the variable column. So instead, I want to call it rank endurance. And so this is then saying rank all the sports by, sorry, all the sports means everything in here essentially. So all sport, I am surprised by that. I feel like that should be sport. Anyway, let's wait and see. That does not look right to me. I don't know how that ends up being wrong if it was wrong. But anyway, let's have a look. So it's saying sports endurance. So that's just saying, oh no, that is correct. I'm sorry. I was getting myself mixed up for a second. Sports is the name of the sheet. That should be in round brackets after all. So that's correct. And then it's saying which variable do you want the ranking to be computed on? And the answer is I want it to be on the sports sheet because we could have multiple sheets. You know, we might have not just sports, but multiple sheets. So I need to tell it which sheet and then which variable. And the variable is endurance, and that's given in square brackets. Then there's an optional third argument. This is argument 1, argument 2. Then there's an optional third argument that I'm leaving blank. And then DESC stands for descending order. So you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Highest to lowest. And then dense is a type of way of computing the rankings. So for example, if you've got 2 sports with the same endurance, they're going to get the same rank. So they'll both be, let's say, rank number 3. It also refers to the fact, let's imagine that you had, in fact, let's get the rankings and then let me show you. So I've already got rank endurance over here. So I'm going to make a new one. I'm going to call it rank endurance 2. Rank endurance 2, just so I come up with something new. And I then click away. So you click away onto the canvas and we should find that we've got a new field, rank endurance 2, or a new column, sorry. But it's hard to tell from this whether it's a column or a measure, but it's a column and you'll notice it's got the Greek summation sign there for sum. Okay, now one of the great things about Power BI with any new measures, new columns that you create is you can always recover the DAX code that created them by clicking on the relevant new column. So you can see each time I click on one, it's telling me what it is that you use to create it. Okay, so rank endurance 2. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table. So I go table down here. I've got lots of screenshots in my Word document of how I did all these things, but I imagine the video is going to be more useful than that. So I now grab the sport. I could either drag it onto the visualization, or I could drag it onto the columns. And I'm going to add rank endurance 2, and I'm going to add endurance. So please note that visualization doesn't just mean column charts, pie charts, all these other things. This here is also a visualization. This is a table visualization, but it is a visualization. So this can count as one of your visualizations. Anything in here counts as a visualization. Okay, so then I might change the names of the variables. I can also resize them as follows, the columns. I think we don't want them to be bigger than they have to be. And I might come down here and go rename for this visual and just call it rank. Because, you know, unless otherwise stated, presumably it has to be the rank by endurance. So now I'm going to rename endurance as well, which means I can make this a bit narrower again. And what you can see, going back to the DAX code for a second, dense, right? Have a look at the rankings. Bobsledding and pole vaulting have both got the same endurance, so they've both been given the rank of 1. And then the next highest sport is sprints, track and field sprints, and it's been given a rank of 2. It could have been given under a different ranking system. It could be given a rank of 3, because you'd say that's the first, or that's the first and second equal first. So we've already counted 1, 2, so that one might be 3, and then 4, and then 5, and so forth. So that's what's being determined when we choose dense, that it's this type of ranking scheme. Okay, is that a question? Hi, Jim, Ratika, lecture. Okay, that's an email coming through. Too late for now. Okay, now what else could I do to spizz this up a little bit, make this a bit flasher? Well, what I can do another way, which is what I was trying to say in class, but I know it became almost impossible to follow. So if you go to your table, so click on the table again, notice over here you've got the drop-down menu, as we've already said, but in this drop-down menu, I've actually got conditional formatting. So I could say, you know, the two choices for me would usually be background color or data bars. So I've chosen background color, and I could just choose OK. I'll just run with what we've got. And now, it's in fact, actually, though, you probably usually want the darker color to be the higher rank. So I'm going to go back. I'll go remove conditional formatting, and I'll put it back in. Rank, conditional formatting, background color, and I'm just going to swap the light and the dark. In fact, that probably wasn't light enough. So I could come down here, go more colors, and move it a bit lighter. And so now I've got light for a high ranking, dark for a low ranking. Okay, maybe I've overdone it there, but that's the idea. And then you could do something similar for endurance, conditional formatting, but this time I'll do the data bars. And if you do the data bars, so it's on endurance, you could probably get away with just choosing OK again. You can't have conditional formatting in that case. Now, the rank goes all the way to 30, doesn't it? So to make my rank conditional formatting look a bit better, I may decide to say, let's make the lowest value. So the lowest value is 1, and let's make the highest value, because I'm only going to show the top 6 or 7 or so anyway, or 10, sorry, or 15. So that might be a little bit better in terms of having some color coding with the rank. Yeah, you know, and then in theory, I could copy and paste a couple of times, and then I could amend this for, you know, swap out endurance and put in coordination. Yeah, but I'd have to work out the coordination rank as well, because I need that to be in there instead of the original rank. And then I'd have to go through that whole process again of editing the name by saying rename for this visual, rename for this visual. And then if I wanted to, I would go conditional formatting, conditional formatting. You know, I'm just experimenting with different looks here. I'm not assuming that, you know, this is going to be my final version. Although I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but, you know, you might decide that you prefer the look of this endurance if, and let's go back, we can sort them here, if the endurance is done the same way as the, so let's in fact remove the conditional formatting. If endurance is formatted the same way as rank, which is based on the background color, and we had again the darker color was the lower ranking, and then I want a very light blue. I'll treat that as good enough for this occasion. And then custom value 1, custom value 6. Okay, why did that not work? What did I do wrong then? Let me just have a look again. Is that the wrong one? Conditional formatting, background color. Oh, because it's not a rank, you fool, Jim. I do want it to be maximum and, sorry, I was thinking rank again in my hurry. So we want that to be the other way around like it was originally. And then I clicked on rank rather than endurance. So you can at least undo it, right? You can do Control Z. So let me try one last chance to fix it. Conditional formatting, background color. That's what I'm doing, not the bars. And I want this one to be fairly dark. That one might be light enough. And I want it to run from the lowest value of around, let's even call it 7, to the highest value of 10. Okay, that's now similar. So you've got to decide how you want that to look. And, you know, notice at the moment, I haven't just got the top sports, I've got all of them. So what I could do is I could take a screenshot and then just crop it. Just crop it. I don't need to do anything clever. But alternatively, if you wanted to, you could filter it. So I now come over to here and I go sport. And I say, I'm going to include the top N, and I'm going to do it based on the rank of the endurance. So I've got 2 measures of that. I drop that in, and I could say 15 and see what that does. Okay, let's go. So it's probably done the top 15 in the wrong order. Okay, so that's given me the bottom 15. So what I could do instead then, let's go back and change that. Instead of by the rank, let's do it based on endurance. And now I don't have to crop my visualization, although who's going to know anyway? But, you know, instead I've used a filter and it's automatically fixed it to be just the top 15 or so. You know, as I said to you guys a couple of weeks ago, I've renamed some of the variables before I've started to make them shorter so that they don't take up so much room in the visualizations. Okay, is everybody with me on that? Does anyone have any questions about that? So as far as I can see, that kind of takes us to 5.2 in my Word document. Let me stop the share for a moment and show you. Back to the Word document. So in the Word document, you can see that I've said it. I could take a screenshot from, this is from Exploratory. endurance, strength, and power. That would give me 3 simple visualizations. But the next thing we're up to, which we're trying to do, is compare and contrast. And of course, we've got to get some summary statistics. So we could get the summary statistics in Power BI, but I don't know that they come out very neatly or easily. I will try and do it in a minute. But first of all, I'm just going to go back to my Excel file and do it in there. So did I close? It looks like I might have closed the Excel file. Okay, let me just reopen it. Okay, so stop the share, redo it. Okay, so now I've got all of my sports again and my different attributes, endurance, strength, etc. And I could simply say descriptive statistics. This is still really for part 1, for A1, descriptive statistics. So what does it say? It just says using summary statistics. Okay, I'm going to right align them, and I could go, I'm going to look at the average, the standard deviation, the variance, the skewness, and the kurtosis, right? And I could get all of these very quickly. Equals average. And close that. Equals STDEV.S for standard deviation. Close the bracket. Oops, what did I do wrong? I've somehow pressed the wrong button. In fact, it looks like I've stuffed up water polo. So let me do it again. STDEV.S, open the bracket, and then grab all of the data up to row 2. And I do the same thing with variance. So, you know, sometimes it's quicker to type it in as long as you're being careful. B2 to B41. Skewness equals skew. There's no .s for some bizarre reason. Number, so what do we say? B2 to B41. There's 40 sports. Kurtosis is just Kurt. So no .s, no .p, no kurtosis. How strange. But as I've said to you, the people who wrote this up in Excel really don't know what the hell they're doing. I mean, that may seem like a bold statement, but how can you have skew.s and skew.p, but not kurt.s and not kurt.p? It just makes no sense in any conceivable universe. Okay, so now I reformat them a little bit. You always want to tidy them up. I mean, I'm not necessarily going to penalize people that, you know, give me something like that, but I will certainly say in the comments, tidy up your decimal points. It's not helpful. That makes it very hard to read for any normal person. I accept that there might be people out there that can read it easily, but most of us can't. So now what I can do is just drag that across. And then I could bring my headings down. Now, you know, this is the longest possible way of doing this. But now I've got a lovely little summary statistics table. So I know the assignment information sheet says do this in Power BI or Tableau, I think it is, but you're allowed to do different bits in different programs. Okay, so obviously what I could then do is I could take a screenshot of that. And then when I'm interested in just 3 of the variables, okay, so one of the things I could do here is go Control-C to copy, and then I'm going to put it on a new sheet, but I'm going to do Alt-E-S-V for values. So another way to do this would be to right-click and choose Paste, but you want to paste just the values. And that means there's no more formulas. And so now what I can do, for example, is I could make another version of the table where I was just focusing on the variables that they told me to focus on. I mean, I don't know if we want total and rank in there as well. We could. But let's imagine we wanted summary statistics just for endurance, nerve, and coordination. That's one way we could do this. Obviously, I should not on my original sheet. So I'd need to tidy that all up again. 4's definitely enough. 3's good enough. Maybe even 2's enough. 2's easier to read, right? In this case. So 2's probably enough. But 6, 7, 8, 9 is too many. So, obviously I couldn't just delete the columns here unless I was willing to lose all the data, which I may not want to do. Now, another way we could get the descriptive statistics, so a final way, is I go data. A final way in Excel, I mean, data analysis, descriptive statistics. I say the labels are in the first row and that I'm going to choose B2. I don't put sports in. Excel's only going to accept numerical data. You're allowed the names, but you can't put in a categorical variable. So I go B2 to M41. In fact, I want the name. So I mean to go B1 to B40. Sorry, B1 to M41. I could also do it like that. B1 to M41. Now I've got it in there twice. I'll do it again. B1 to M41. Now I've got labels in the first row and I want to send the output range. This time I'll just send it up here. I'll put it into P1. And then strangely enough, you have to check summary statistics to indicate that you actually want summary statistics. Okay, and then you have to tidy this up. It's a bit crazy the way it's done, but I think what you've got to do is go, let's just have a look. Can we? No, okay. So maybe the best bet is to go equals strength. I'm just trying to think, because I need that in the... So I'm just going to copy and paste that formula, which was just equal the thing to the right. I can't think of a better way to do that at the moment other than with Copilot, but I haven't been very successful with Copilot most of the time. It's always wanting an email address. So then what I'm going to do, in fact, that was really badly done. Sorry, how stupid. I didn't notice it wasn't working. So let's go back. We're here. What I'm going to do instead is say it equals the thing to the left. So now I've got endurance above the endurance descriptive statistics. And then I'm going to copy that formula. Sorry, I might have got that wrong then. I'm going to copy that formula, which I've got it in Q1, which says Q1 equals P1. I'm just going to copy that into the blank cells. I really hate doing this sort of thing because imagine if you had 1,000 columns, this would not be a good way to do it. And then I'm just going to show you, sorry, I'm then going to delete all of those columns because it keeps repeating all the names. So hopefully we can do that non-contiguously and just choose delete. Okay, well, it would have worked, but of course, if you look at Q1, it says I equal P1. So what I've got to first of all do is copy that row, if you like, on top of itself after choosing values. So I did Control C and then I chose Alt ES, which is edit, paste, special, but otherwise you simply right click and choose paste values. And so now they're not formulas, they're text. And now I can come back and do what I was doing a second ago, which is to delete all the duplicate columns. Although I've made it so small, I'm not clicking the right spot now. So I'm clicking on all the columns which have got the words mean, standard deviation, etc., except the first one. And now I right click on part of the selection, excuse me, and choose delete. And so now I've got a nice, neat, although I look like I missed one of them, a nice, neat little table apart from rounding, which we should now fix up as well. A nice little summary statistic table. I've got to get rid of that. I could move these down below. And that's another way we could get the summary statistics. Yep, so what I would do, I would not, I'm zooming, I can zoom in and out so easily. I would not copy and paste that as it is into my Word document if I was going to use that. I would take a screenshot. I mean, I'd make that a bit bigger so I can see the full name, because if I take a screenshot, I can so easily resize the table in my Word document for maximum user friendliness or maximum readability. Okay, now, any questions about any of that before we continue? I know some of you, are going to have to go, but I'm going to keep going for at least a little bit, an hour after probably everybody leaves, or at least an hour after 5 o'clock. Or however long it takes me to finish it. But any questions about any of that? Now, sorry, I'm just checking an email just for 30 seconds that's truly urgent from Kaplan. Do I have to agree to this? You'll be teaching? Nope. Okay, no choice. So that's good. Nothing to reply to. Okay. Okay, let's continue then. So just some general things to know about Power BI. So I'm going to add a new page. I don't think we've talked about this very much. So I'm just going to create a couple of visualizations. In fact, I could show it to you here on this page. All visualizations are slices. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you'd prefer I made a new one, we could. We just go stack bar chart and I put some variables on it. Endurance and sport.
Jim?
Yes, Jason.
Your screen is still on the Excel.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
No.
I sometimes make that mistake for an hour and nobody tells me. Thank you very much. That was nearly a disaster. Okay, well, I think because time's of the essence, let me in fact do it here. So thanks again, Jason. So I'm on all visualizations are slices. Can you see that tab? That's now visible?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I don't know if we've talked about this very much before. This is a bit of a crazy a crazy page. It's meant to be crazy. It's not meant to be a good choice. So all I want to show you is an effect that you can have on every visualization on the page by just clicking. Let's say I just click on rugby. If I click on rugby in my first visualization on the screen, then rugby remains in the foreground. It's the same color as it was before. There's rugby, here's rugby, right? So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 visualizations on the page. Remember again that tables count as visualizations. Anything you grab from over here counts as a visualization. So if I click on rugby, that's saying bring rugby to the foreground, or realistically, send everything else to the background a little bit. Relegate everything else to a lower level of emphasis. So if I click on rugby and what is that one? Auto racing, you can see rugby and auto racing appear here very clearly, and here and here. And now the tables only show rugby and auto racing. And there's nothing special about this first visualization. This applies to any of the visualizations. I could do it. This one, so this is a kind of bar chart. This, as you probably know, is a pie chart. These two are tables, and this one is a tree map. It's very hard to see what's been highlighted. So it's unfortunate that this is not highlighted better, but if you have a look, when I click on the first visualization, there's a little gray frame. It's just got a frame around the stack column chart. And if I click on this thing, which is actually a tree map, now it's the tree map, which has got the rectangle around it to say that's a tree map. This one is a pie chart. This one is a table, etc. So there's nothing special about my bar chart. The same applies if I do to the tree map. I can say, just show me or highlight rugby, auto racing, and swimming and diving. And so you can see that you can affect every other visualization on the page. It's not going to affect any of the other visualizations. They're still the same. So that was my main point, is that there's an interaction that you can have between the visualizations. So sometimes you may want to do something like this, take a screenshot and then go, sorry for the sound effects, and take another screenshot and so forth. So that might be handy. Okay. And so my next topic is going to be slices. So slices, which that's kind of what I was doing just then, is slicing the other visualizations. But there's another way to do it actually with slices. So one of your visualizations here is a slicer. There's the original one, slicer. So before we do that, let's build a visualization so that we can see what effect the slicer has. So I'm going to start off with a stack bar chart, which is my go-to visualization in nearly every application we do. I go to a stack bar chart. And I'm going to grab sport and put it on the x-axis. And I'm going to grab nerve and put it on the y-axis. Okay, well, maybe for this one, I should have gone, I went for bar. I've got to swap the columns, or, okay, I'm going to swap the column here. So if I had that original bar chart, I actually should have put sport on the y-axis and nerve on the x-axis. Sorry, that's what I wanted, something like that, right? You know, and here on its own, I can say, well, I just want to highlight those two for you. And I could take a screenshot. So slices. In fact, let's bring something, let's make another one. So I'm going to do a pie chart. It's probably not going to be good for anything, but nevertheless, I'll put strength in the values and I'll put sport in the details. So now I've got two visualizations. The selection of rodeo, wrestling, and water polo is already affecting this, but it looks like we've got different colors. So maybe we could make this original visualization the same color by grabbing sport and putting it on the legend. Now, hopefully they're the same color, like rodeo, racing, steer wrestling is pink. Roller skating is that dark brown. So now they're both the same color. You know, you may not very often have two visualizations that match so closely as this, but I think in general, if you've got colored for sports, you want the colors to be the same everywhere if you're using color coding for different sports. Now, you may not do that at all. That's not my point right now. It's to show you a slicer. So I can now click on the white canvas and grab or start a slicer. So you'll notice that the slicer is something you choose by putting variables into the fields, just like we did over here. We've got y-axis, x-axis, legend, etc. Legend, values, details. Now, when I click on the slicer, all it's got is field. So I could, for example, add sport by dropping that onto the new slicer visualization container, you could almost call this, or putting it on the field. So if I put it on the field, what it then does is say, oh, this is a categorical variable with 39 or 40 choices. So I'm automatically going to give you a list of them all. And you can now say, well, I just want to see these visualizations. And so that's what a slicer does. So it's similar to what we were doing before when we were here or wherever it was, all visualizations of slicers by selectively clicking on certain things and not others. And, and if I didn't make it very clear, but if I can go back and fix it, it works on any of them. So you can do it on the table. So on the table that I've clicked on, it sends everything else to the background, like slightly lighter colored text. But on all the other tables, it sends everything else into hyperspace, so you can't see them at all. But you can see with the other visualizations, you can still see things, but they're just relegated to a lower level of emphasis. But back to slicers, with the slicers, now I don't know where the all button's gone, so this is not, okay, you can do it that way. This is hiding everything except for what you've selected. So that's a slicer, and formatting our visual. So while I'm clicked on the slicer, formatting my visual enables me to change this, for example, to a drop-down menu. Or I can go back to the top somewhere here. Okay, so you've got to turn them all off and then it's back to all. Or another thing I could have here would be a tile. Now, the problem with the tile approach is if you've got lots of sports, as we do, it's hard to make it fit on the page, or at least hard to show all the choices without having it take up a huge amount of the dash. We call this a dashboard page, without it taking up a huge amount of the dashboard page. Okay, but I'll come back to that. What might be more interesting to you right now is another type of slicer. So I'm going to click on slicer again. I clicked on the white canvas, a blank portion of the canvas first. Okay, I've double clicked, sorry, and I choose slicer. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab one of the quantitative or numerical variables, such as nerve. Now, if I drag nerve onto either the canvas of the, I shouldn't say canvas, either of the container of the slicer, or I drag it onto the field, then because it's a numerical variable, it's automatically giving me a between slicer. Now, exactly what it looks like depends on how you configure the width compared to the height of the box. But I can show either everything, 1.2 to 9.5 here. It's giving me the maximum of nerve and the minimum of nerve. Or, I mean, I could also make the box a bit smaller. It doesn't have to be quite as big as that. I could just show the best performing, or at least the sports which require the most nerve. So that's what I'm getting there. And then I could add to that, if I wanted to, another slicer if we thought for a moment that we were supposed to be looking at sports with both high nerve and high power, I could also drop power onto here, make my slicer a bit smaller, and then only show the sports which have got high-ish power and high nerve. Anyway, so that's how you use slicers. So for our purposes, the slicers are either going to be tiles or drop-down menus, or probably between, where you get to control what it is that you're showing in terms of anything between this minimum and this maximum that I'm choosing. But, okay, well, let me come to another point then quickly. Tree map. I'm going to grab a tree map. Now, this can be seen as a visualization in its own right. I don't think there's a good example of it in this particular application of sport, but it can be a visualization in its own right. You know, let's imagine that what I was going to drop in here was sales information. And each one of these rectangles may be telling me how much furniture I sold in dollars compared to computers, compared to shoes, compared to furniture, compared to clothes, etc. So the tree map is originally intended as something a bit like a pie chart. Now, I mean, I can put strength onto this, presumably, if I put sport here as well, but it's going to have to be awfully big to be able to see all the sports. So let me go back to everything being selected here. And let's go back. That should now be everything. It's just we can't see them, right? So I can use my tree map here as the slicer. That's how I tend to use it. So, you know, let me copy that onto a new page. We've got too many sports here for this purpose, but you know, we won't always have so many, but at least I can make this something reasonably small, unlike, in my mind at least, the tile approach to the same kind of slicer. You know, I'm going to say don't sink. In order for most of that to be visible, it's taking up nearly half of the whole page. And they would both work the same way. You know, if I wanted to, for example, again, show, what did I choose? I chose that one. So I need sport on the y-axis and let's say strength on the x-axis. You know, I could say I want ice hockey. This one's in alphabetical order. No. Well, I'll just grab a few sports. And that's also affecting my tree map, and it's changing it up here. So now I could have done the same thing with the tree map. So that's what I tend to use the tree map for, is not as a visualization in its own right, but as a like a slicer or control for other visualizations. But one problem with it at the moment as I'm doing it is that these tiles, each one of these colored sort of rectangles is called a tile. They're not actually the same size. They're actually sized in proportion to the strength variable. So the sport with the highest strength is going to have the biggest rectangle here, and the sport with the lowest strength is going to have the smallest rectangle. So I can change that by creating a new measure or new column again. So I go to modeling and I go to new measure, and under measure I enter, I'm going to call it tile size 2, just because I've done tile size already. And then I say I want it to equal 1. In fact, it can be any number you like. The main thing is I'm making it the same for every sport. And for that matter, for every variable. So I'm going to call it 1, but it doesn't matter what number as long as it's a number. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my tile size 2 onto values, and now it's going to have 2 of them, and then I'm going to get rid of strength. And now it may not be obvious to you because, again, we've got so many sports, but they're all actually the same size tiles now. So I think in general, unless you want the tiles to be sized bigger for stronger, smaller for weaker, etc., if you don't want that, then it's better. If there's no reason to have that, it's better to have the tile size the same. Okay, any questions? Now, all you need to do to return the visualization to everything is come back to what you clicked on and do something like a double click. So I've got cycling, which means it's only showing cycling, although it's hard to tell that. You'll find everything else is hidden, but partially hidden. So only cycling is highlighted at the top. Ice hockey, etc., are all relegated to the background here. So anyway, hopefully you get the idea. But what I was trying to say was, how do you go back? The way you go back is to click on one of the squares again, and that will clear it. Okay, let's go to another page. Anyone got any questions about that? Nope. Okay, well, let's return to the question itself for a moment. Use summary statistics and 3 visualizations to develop, at least 3 visualizations to develop the ideal profile for an athlete participating in the following sports. So boxing, wrestling, and martial arts. Okay, so one thing we could do here is we could, just so we know what we're doing, I'm going to add a little text box and call this fighting sports for now. And if I'm going to bother to have a title, I want to be able to see it. I tend to go for white text on some foreground. So I tend to go now to general effects, background, and I want the background to be dark because then that clearly stands out from my visualizations. By having a dark background and white text, it clearly distinguishes itself from my visualizations. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a filter on this page. So I'm going to grab sport and say filter on this page. At least this is what I'm thinking about at the moment. And now hang on, I'm in the alternative universe, aren't I? Okay, well, I'm going to leave this Power BI file and I'm going to go to my other Power BI file, the one that is actually the same as your assignment, because I don't have wrestling in mine or martial arts, I don't think. So I've just switched, I'm sorry, to the other Power BI file that I gave you. And that looks like that's it. So I'm going to go to a new page and I'm going to do that again. Sorry, I go text box, which is across the top on the home tab, text box, and I'll just go fighting sports again. Fighting sports, white, bump it up to 40 or so, and bold and underlined, and then effects, and I just want it to be something dark. Put it roughly in the middle for now. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say filters on this page, and I'm going to put sport into filters on this page. So if I do something like this, I'm going to put a note about that in an appendix and maybe a screenshot. In the main body of the report, it should be results, 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 not really process. not telling us anything about the slices or the filters, unless you were going to put it in a footnote on the page. But I think it's not a bad idea to say something about it and to evidence some of the things you've done. So including having a little section of DAX code that you used. You could have a little appendix on the DAX code, maybe an appendix on any filters you've used, etc. So I'm using this time a basic filter. So what I did was, again, for filters on this page, I added sport. And now I'm going to come in and it was boxing. It's at least in alphabetical order, martial arts, and the last one was wrestling. And then do I need to choose apply? Usually you do. Strangely, there doesn't seem to be an apply button in this case. Okay, and so now what I could do is I could produce a little table of the sport. So I'm going to go table. And I'm going to begin by putting sport in there, and it should just be the three: boxing, martial arts, wrestling. Okay, and then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm not sure if it's going to be useful until I've done it, but I'm just going to grab all the variables in order, and it's a pity we're getting some everywhere. I thought that didn't happen if we did it this way. But obviously I'm wrong. I'm just going to grab them all and put them into the table at the bottom. Now, there is a way to automate this, but, it takes a bit of time to work it out. Okay, and they are now all in my table. So unfortunately, I thought there was a way to avoid it, but it didn't work. I now have to go in, I think, and edit all of these so that they don't say sum of all the way through. Now, it may be that I can also just go don't summarize. Okay, so that might be quicker. Don't summarize. Is that going to change anything? Hopefully not. Don't summarize. I'll just quickly finish them off. Maybe it's hardly worth doing, but just so we can see what it looks like. Another 30 seconds. Okay, and then I could make it a little bit narrower, but I think there's no shortcut. You've just got to do it one at a time. Okay, so now maybe what I can see here is something about these sports in general, which is, what can we say? Well, it would be nice to know the means and the medians of all of those activities, coordination, durability, etc. So we've got them worked out previously, but I think as a guess, it's not very accurate. But we could use as an approximate rule of thumb that the average is 5. It actually varies between, if we take the median to be the value, it varies between about 4.25 and 5.6. But let's say 5 is the average, just to keep it simple. So what can we say about boxing, martial arts, and wrestling based on this? Well, let's have a look. So boxing, now this is the real data, isn't it? Boxing is very high on power, as is martial arts. Okay, I've just reordered them. But wrestling's not so high on power. Boxing is very high together with wrestling on strength, but martial arts are not so big on strength. And then let's have a look. Wrestling's low on coordination. Wrestling is low on coordination, and relatively high for boxing. So I think it's very hard to tell a story about that. So now let's go and have a look at my notes again, where I've made some points regarding this. So I'll just switch to my notes. Sorry, was there a chat again? We have to explain. Do we have to explain about the visualization? That's a good question, Sanaya. That is a good question. I think if it says compare and contrast, that means you've got to interpret them. If it says just provide a statistic and a visualization, I don't think you do have to comment. But in this case, it's probably worthwhile adding some comments to everything, just because I think it's a little bit unclear from the question. Okay, now let me just change the share again. So I'm going back to my Word document. Okay, so that's the sort of thing I was doing here, although what I ended up doing actually was I changed it to rank. So yes, that's probably, or at least potentially, a more fruitful idea. So I go back to my fighting sports. And in fact, I'm not interested in all of those variables anyway, am I? So I'm going to copy my table down below just to save a bit of work, although actually it's not going to save much. So I don't think I'm going to start again and go table, and I'm going to put sport into the table. And then I'm just going to put the ranks: rank of endurance, rank of coordination, rank of nerve. Let's make it so we can at least see them. Now, this time we can't totally rename the ranks because we need it to be rank of, we need it to say endurance rank. We could change it to that. Rename for this visual. Endurance rank. Rename for this visual. Coordination rank. Rename for this visual. Nerve rank. Okay. So now I've got that. I could make that a little bit tidier. And you'd want to do another one of these for football, soccer and rugby, and another one for speed skating, figure skating, and skiing as being similar sports that the assignment questioners asked us to group together. So now we could have a look here. What are we being asked again? Use summary statistics to describe the ideal profile. Well, so I didn't put power in there. I'm not sure we don't need both. But in any case, okay, so with that in mind, let me go back to the notes now, because I think it's very tricky to get a good answer even from there. So I've said, does this help? I think it potentially does help. I've got them ranked by endurance. But what do we then say? The sports that are high on endurance tend to be sports that. So as I've said here, I use AI as an aid to thinking. So this is then my prompt. I meant to highlight my prompt, but I didn't always do that very well, sorry. My prompt. So let me just highlight that in a different color. There's my prompt. The sports that are high on endurance tend to be sports. And I've asked AI, I'm like imagining I'm in your shoes. Can we do summary statistics? Yes, we can, Bridgetta. I'll do that in a minute. We'll have a crack at that in a minute. I was asking AI to write me some paragraphs just so I can see what it thinks it might look like, because it wasn't obvious to me how we might use the information in order to write a meaningful paragraph. So I've read through all of them that it's written, and then I've interrupted it, but maybe I haven't. Oh, here we go. Here's my prompt again. I want something which comes out of the data only, little else. I don't think this assignment would be at all fair if it's supposed to reward you for knowledge of these sports and these various measures: endurance, flexibility, durability, coordination, analytical aptitude, etc. So I've said, look, I want what you say to be something that comes out of the data only. So a sentence that uses only what comes out of the data. Nothing about physiology, no theory, no guesses, nothing based, if you ask me about boxing, I'd guess, well, boxing, you need endurance. Boxing, you need resilience, but that's not one of our measures. Boxing, you need power. Boxing, you need strength. But we need to make sure that's what the data says, not just that that's what we assume is the case. At least that's the way I'm interpreting the assignment. It is data analytics. So it's not supposed to be based upon what we already know about the sports, which again, I think would be very unfair because a lot of people aren't going to know anything about most of those sports. And most people in the class probably don't know anything about exercise physiology, etc. And I'm not pretending to be any different. I don't know much about that at all. So I think this has got to be something that we get purely from the data. So then it comes up with these alternative versions, right? And it comes up with suggestions. So then I've said, that's my next prompt. I think this sort of thing is very hard to read from the data. And I still think that the answers are based partly on prior knowledge. Whereas I think what we should be doing is, in effect, assuming data from another planet, a planet we don't know anything about, where everything may be topsy-turvy, everything may be opposite. So I've said, I think in this case, rather than looking at these tables and graphs they've suggested, a correlation matrix, heat map, or scatter plot might be a better approach. For what it's worth, ChatGPT agrees and says, yes, at least then it would be strictly driven by the data. And so now it says, yes, I think that is a better approach, because the task does not say write about physiology, guess what athletes are like, describe endurance in general. It says compare and contrast, and really it means based on the data. So I now go back to... Now, there are other approaches we could take, but I go back to my correlation matrix, starting with the idea, wherever it's gone, that where did my fight data? Okay, I don't seem to have it there, but I thought okay, here it is underneath. So I'm going to say that fighting sports tend to be high on power. I then worked out the average. So let's do that in Power BI, and then we'll come back to where we are. So which one's that? Last save, true data. Okay, let me switch back. Share. Data 4000, that's the one, I hope. No, I don't know if that was the right one. Nope, sorry, I got them mixed up. I didn't realize I had two open. Okay, here. So what we could do as well, bearing in mind that everything on this page at the moment is about wrestling, martial arts, and boxing. So what I could do is maybe go for a multi-row card or a card. Let's have a look. I could click on card, and I could add here that I want to know what is the average power. Now, can I have more than one? Maybe not in this case. Okay. So I could do it for one, and I could change. Oh, I did nerve, did I? I meant to do power. So I'll do it again. I could go to card, and I could drop power in here, and it's gone for sum. I definitely don't want sum. This time it really is adding up the power for what? For boxing, for martial arts and wrestling. If you added those three up, what's that? 14, roughly just under 15, just under 23.6. So that's what we've got there, sum of power. So I want to come down here and say, make it an average. The average power for wrestling, boxing, and martial arts is 7.84. I could copy that multiple times and say, let's add. So what else did we say was particularly good for, let's use boxing as a quick example. Durability, but it doesn't come back so much into the others. Nerve. Anyway, that's maybe something to work out later. I can put strength in here. So by getting rid of power and put strength, it's going to be automatically on sum, unfortunately. So I change it to average. I could do the same thing with the last variable, which we said was going to be nerve, wasn't it? I could put nerve into this after. Well, in fact, it just replaced it. And I changed that to average. Okay, and I could make them all a bit smaller. So it's not perfect, but that's one way that we could get some summary statistics. Now, I have to fiddle around with this every time I make a change. So a better approach might be to put them all in the one card. So I go for a multi-row card, and then multi-row card. So I'm going to do the same thing. Put power, put strength, and put nerve in. Okay, now it's automatically taken it over there. I'm surprised. Does that depend on... Oh, that depends on how wide or narrow I make the visualization. So if I want it to be many columns, I make the visualization wide. If I want it to just be a single column, I make the visualization narrower. And then I could come down here and change them all to average. Okay, so now I've got the average of nerve, average of strength, and average of average of power. And I could probably, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me bring that one back, power. So average, I could probably rename them. I've just got to be careful. Strength, rename, nerve, rename in each case for this visual, sorry. Oh, what? I did it again. Power. Try again. Rename for this visual. And in fact, first of all, don't rename it until after you've made sure you've changed it to average. Look, the one danger in renaming visuals and editing the titles is if you subsequently change something about the visualization, then the name doesn't update. So you can even swap the variables and the name will not update. Now, I think this one now needs a title because you don't know what that is. So you come in here, and if you can find cards, does it not give us a title? Well, that's disappointing. Why is the title option not showing? Okay, well, if I couldn't title it, and it looks like I can't. Oh, here, title. Sorry, under general, in the usual spot. So I could say average or averages. And then that gives me a nice little summary table of descriptive statistics in Power BI. Only strength. So there's other ways we could do this. We could try and do this in just a regular table, perhaps. So I go table and I go power and I want it to be average, and nerve and I want it to be, so it's doing, maybe that's the same as what I did before nearly. Is that going to make it fit down the page? No. Okay, so we're going to get something very similar to what I did over here. Oh, gosh. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to read emails. I've got a new computer, and for the first time in about 10 years, every time an email pops up, it notifies me. I must say that is good because I'm not usually aware of them in real time. Okay, anyway, we could do something like that. Change that to average, and we're going to get something similar. However, I'm not convinced that we get an easy answer this way. So let me go back to my Word document. Word document, which is the Word document. They all look the same from here, sorry. But I think that is it. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, back to my Word document. So, what I then say, based upon, I'm looking at, I did something similar, but I did all other sports. So how would I get the statistics for all other sports? Well, interestingly, what we probably can do, so unfortunately, I will jump back again to Power BI for a second, but I'll be a bit quicker this time because I'm recognizing them more quickly. Right, I've got my average of power, my average, okay, I didn't mean rank. I definitely did not mean to get rank. Let's put strength in there, average. This is automatically the average of my 3 fighting sports, power, nerve, strength. But if I copy this onto a new page, right, onto a new page, it is they're not the same numbers, 7.84, 6.84, 7.46. These are now for all sports because on this page, there's no filter. Whereas on my page 5, I think, isn't it? Aren't I right about that? I've got a filter of just the 3 sports, boxing, martial arts, and wrestling. Whereas if I go to page 6, there's no such filter. So that is now all sports. So, I could take a screenshot of that and a screenshot of that. So those 2 tables and put them side by side like I have done in my Word document. Don't think that everything you do has to be accomplished in every respect in Power BI or other programs. You can do a certain amount of resizing and editing and putting things together in Microsoft Word itself. So I've got some famous fighters here. What some students have done in the past is put a little icon or something or a little meme for each of the personas. So, what I found is that fighting's very high on power compared to the average of all the other sports. And it's very high on nerve compared to the average of all other sports. And very high on flexibility compared to all other sports on average. So then what have I said down the bottom? An ideal fighter is an athlete with high to very high levels of power and strength and endurance. Now, I don't know if that's true. So I'm going to put here nerve and flexibility. This is all on average. It has to kind of be on average once you're turning to... I'm just going to do that. An ideal fighter is an athlete with high to very high levels of power, nerve, and flexibility. Now, remember, you're actually not doing it on power, nerve, and flexibility. You're doing it on endurance, nerve, and hand-eye coordination. But this is a way that we could get a bit of an answer because I'm saying this number's bigger than that, bigger than that, bigger than that. And I'll show you another way to do this in a minute. An ideal fighter is an athlete with high to very high levels of power, nerve, and flexibility compared to other athletes, especially in the case of boxing. Now, I don't know if that's true given the way I've written it now. Whilst martial arts, okay, especially maybe what I should say with respect to power in the case of boxing. Whilst martial artists tend to excel more in analytical aptitude and flexibility. And let me find something about wrestling quickly. excuse me. So wrestling is okay. I haven't got it in that spreadsheet. I've got to get it from another. So let me just have a quick look at the data in Power BI without actually switching to it, just to save a minute. Although let me just, maybe I will switch. Let me show you this. So we are usually on this tab, Report View. If you look in the far left corner of my Power BI file, we are usually in here in Report View. But if I go to Table View, I basically get the spreadsheet again, and I can go look for wrestling. So I can sort this in ascending order. In fact, let me go in descending order. So wrestling's at the very top. And you can see wrestling is really about strength, and coordination's relatively low. Okay, so I could come back to my Word document. Sorry to be jumping around so much. And say, whilst martial arts, and so there's a bit of a difference. So I've tried to group them together, but there are some differences. And wrestlers tend to be very strong and not very flexible. So, you know, I think the question, to be honest, is very, very challenging and tricky. But that's the sort of thing I would be heading towards doing. Okay, now let me go back to Excel, but to do this, I'm going to get the original Excel file this time. So we want sport again. Assessment data. Okay, looks like I'd already been in there anyway. So I'll just, for the moment, give that a color so it's going to be quicker to find it. Okay, and then I will switch back to it. Okay, so you should be able to see a yellow screen with Excel on it, or Excel screen. Okay, so I'm now going to get rid of the highlighting because that's not helping. And, oops, sorry. Just for a completely different approach, I'm going to rename this just to make it a bit shorter, data. That's the sheet at the bottom, and I'm going to make a copy of it. So I right click on it and go move or copy. And I say, I want to create a copy, and you can do it at the end. So now I've got a second copy. Okay. So I can make some changes to it without being too concerned about what I'm losing. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to put boxing. In fact, I think the first thing I'm going to do is sort them in alphabetical order. So I'm going to highlight all of the data. I've just highlighted all of the data. And then I'm going to go format as a table and choose the first option. Format as a table. So now I've got these drop-down menus and I can sort Z to A or A to Z, and I'm going to number them. I've got boxing, I've got wrestling, and I've got martial arts. Okay, and then I've got football as group 2, soccer, and what's the last one? Soccer and rugby, RS2. And then we've got speed skating. I'm going to call it group 3, figure skating, speed skating, and skiing. Well, in fact, there's all sorts of skiing, isn't there? Not just one thing. So ski jumping, skiing, Nordic, like that. Okay, and then for the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the sort. So I'm going to say groups, highlight all the data again, and sort. So I'm going to go data sort. Is it not going to let me do that? Is that right? Because I've got those. So I shouldn't have done it that way. Oh, that was letting me. So why wouldn't it let me a second ago do it? Well, that really puzzles me. So I'm not allowed to include that column. Okay, so in that case, I better get rid of by formatting it as a table. Let's go back. I want to unformat. So how do I unformat? Doesn't seem to give me any obvious option there, does it? New table style. Okay, well, I'm going to have to very embarrassingly go back to where I didn't have any of those. So it's just I think at least that's the problem. So I'm going to have to go back and just sort them again, but I'm going to do a simple sort. Data sort and sort based on the sport. Okay, and then I'll come through. I have to do it again. I'm sorry. Boxing. I'll be a little bit quicker this time. Boxing, wrestling, and I've run too far. Boxing, martial arts and wrestling. That's the problem. Okay, and then we said soccer, rugby, and football is the only group 2. And then 3 is nearly all S's. Figure skating, skiing, speed skating. Is there anything else in that realm? Water skiing's part of it. I don't know. Is water skiing part of skiing? What are you going to do with water skiing? Are you going to include that as part of skiing when it says skiing? I don't know. It's up to you, but I would be saying something about that. You know, I trust you're with me. The question says put together speed skating, figure skating, and skiing. Now, there's nothing called skiing anyway. There's only things called ski jumping. Is that supposed to be part of it? Is that skiing or is that something else? Skiing alpine, skiing, that's a good way to get killed. Skiing freestyle, skiing Nordic, water skiing. Do you think that should be part of it? Yes or no? Do you think ski jumping should be part of it? Yes or no? I don't know. So, you know, for now, for the sake of argument, let me put them in. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort the data again on those columns, or on that A column. Column, I want to do it on add a level. Data has headers. Okay, but I didn't give a header for my original column. So that is odd. Why can't I choose something else? That seems strange. Maybe I didn't select the right rows. It looks like I didn't select the top row. So let me try that again. And in fact, let me just call this grouping this time. Grouping or groups. So I'll try that again. And go data sort. And sort by groups. Okay, so now I've got all my groups at the top. And what I could begin with again is I just want averages. But, you know, you decide, do you want to use the median or do you want to use the mean? I'm going to use the median this time. So I'm going to grab the median of every variable. So weightlifting all the way to boxing, and I've got the median. And then I'm going to drag that across, and I'm going to put here all sports, right? Oops. And then I'm going to grab the median. I'm going to do the median again, but this time it's going to be fighting only. Fighting sports, right? So I'm going to go median and I'm going to do it just for boxing, in fact, then for that purpose, to make this a tiny bit easier, let's give them 3 different colors. Oops, I didn't quite go right far enough, did I? Oops, that's not a great color at all. More colors. Okay, so then I've got everything else, right? So I'm going to come down here. In fact, I'll still freeze the top row. View, freeze, top row. So median fighting, it's going to be the median of, and I just go to the top and say, I just want those 3. And now I've got the median, and you can see fighting involves a lot of endurance compared to sports on average. Now that's all sports. We could have also another one, which is all other sports. And then we'd have to decide, what are we going to mean by all other sports? But so that I don't have an endless number of tables, I'm going to grab all the sports that are not in our group. But of course, the most meaningful comparison for boxing or for the fighting sports would be to use all of them. So, you know, that's another way we could do this. We could go, so I'll move that underneath. I could go median of fighting and median of non-fighting sports. So in that case, I'd go the median, not of everything, excluding the groups, but all of the groups as well. All of the groups as well, apart from the fighting sports. So now I've got a better comparison of fighting versus non-fighting. The fighting sports are very high on endurance compared to non-fighting, very high on strength, very high on power, very high on, well, very high on everything. Wow, what does that tell you? Unless I've got it wrong, but I don't think I did. That basically, to be a fighter, you've got to be, compared to the other sports, good at everything, it seems. I mean, isn't that what that tells us? The median endurance for non-fighting sports is 6.63 compared to fighting sports. Sorry, the median of fighting is 6.63 compared to 4.63. You know, we could also, just to see the difference here, we could ask, what is the actual difference? Calculate the difference. So, you know, the difference is positive for everything for fighting compared to non-fighting. So that was fighting versus non-fighting. But it's also the same for all sports. So I've got to say that surprises me. It's almost like they're saying, according to the data, fighting is the king of sports. Okay, but we could also do median for the ball sports. Right? I'm choosing the median. Why median? Well, one of the things about the median is not affected by outliers or extreme values. So often when you're interested in an average, the median is preferred to the mean. Let me just give you a very, very quick example, just to make sure you understand that. So if I were to go random integer, okay, what am I going to do? Random integer, let's say from 1 to 20, and I'm going to get 10 of them. Just 1 second, everybody, and I'll get this in here. So I'm going to send this to Excel A, or go to B75 to B84 should be correct. Okay, so I've just made up some numbers here, and let's pretend there's also 1,000, right? So I go mean, median, right? So I could say, well, what's the average of all of them? Imagine this is people's salaries, 3,000, 12,000, 6,000, etc. But then there's someone with, I keep hitting the wrong button, 1,000. So now we've ended up with an average of about 100, but everybody but one person is below 20 or lower. So the mean is not very representative. And if this was Elon Musk, you know, now they're telling us the average salary of the 11 people is, pretend everything's in thousands, 9,000,000. Yep. And yet most of us are earning a relatively minuscule amount. But have a look at the median. Sorry, that would have been cheating. I meant to grab the 100,000. Hit the wrong key. The median's 12. So that was not meant to be treated any different to the other numbers. That's my data set, right? The mean is affected by extreme values. But notice the median is not changing. Because the median is just the value such that 50% are bigger and 50% are smaller. So that's why I'm choosing the median, because it's less affected by outliers. But I'm certainly not going to be fussed if you choose to use the mean. It's up to you. But I think you should make a little comment about it. I've chosen to use the mean, even though it's affected by outliers. I mean, there aren't many outliers, actually, are there? Because everything's between 0 and 10. So there's a strong case for saying that the average, that the mean or average is fine in this case, because all of our values are between 1 and 10 or 0 and 10 anyway. Okay, so I'm going to do the median for my ball sports, and I go median, and I grab the rugby, football, and soccer data, close my brackets, drag that across, and maybe even just for ease of reading, we could bring the variable names back down and do it again here as well. Okay, and then the median for all sports would be the same as before. So I wouldn't need to recalculate that if I wanted a separate table. I could just drag that across. And so now I'm doing, you know, you've got to decide. Are you going to compare the median of the fighting with all the sports or the non-fighting? So down here, you'd be doing the same thing. Is it going to be all sports or just the non-ball sports? Now, I don't know how easy that's going to be to get here, but it might be possible. So I want to grab them and then comma and grab them. That might work. It looks like it did. So it was a non-contiguous selection, because it's not just all in a row or in a single column without any breaks. I've selected C8 to C61 and then C2 to C4. I hope you're with me on what I've done. So I can drag that across. And now I've got ball sports versus non-ball sports, or I could look at it. So I've got two possible differences. The difference versus all sports. In fact, we got more differences again, haven't we? The differences versus non-ball sports and the difference versus fighting sports. Now, since what we're asked to contrast is fighting versus the ball sports, maybe the choice that makes the best sense here is actually the difference with the fighting sports. So I'm going to go the median of the ball sports minus the median of my fighting sports, and I find that the ball sports require a little bit more endurance, but less strength, less power, more speed, a little. So, you know, I might highlight the things that are the biggest differences here. Okay, so now in contrasting ball sports with fighting sports, I could say that the ball sports tend to require less strength, less power, less flexibility, but more durability and more speed and more analytical aptitude. You know, be as simple as that. In comparison with the fighting sports, the ball sports require less strength, less power. Anywhere it's negative is less flexibility, but at the same time, more speed, more durability, more analytical aptitude. You could also do the difference with all sports. So the median of the ball sport minus all sports, and that might give you a slightly different story, or the difference between the median of the ball sports and the median of all other non-ball sports is going to give you a slightly different story again. So you can see no matter what we choose, we're going to end up with a slightly different story to tell. Very sorry about that. Everybody with me on that? So now let's have a look. Describing the personas. Okay, so I think what I would do for this is, now, are we supposed to simply still be focusing on those three things? Endurance? I don't know. It's not clear to me. I'd be interested to know what your opinion is. And, you know, what I can say in case these choices make you nervous about whether you're doing the right thing, my approach is always, if you've got confused about something, I check whether I think it's reasonable that you might have got confused. You know, and if you've gone down a different path to me, I don't automatically assume there's anything wrong with that. I just go back and have a look at the question and what we've done in class and say, you know, is it plausible? Is it reasonable that you could have got this wrong? So I think it's not clear. So I ask your opinion. I presume you can see the question now. It says compare and contrast sports that are high on endurance. Look, it says based on the data set. So it's not based on our prior knowledge of the sports, but based on the data. So then it says compare and contrast sports high on endurance, high on nerve, high on hand-eye coordination. And then we're supposed to, at the end of this, use the summary statistics and use the summary statistics and visualizations in 2. Okay, so we go back to 2. Use summary statistics and at least 3 visualizations to develop the ideal profile. I'm not sure what is meant to be the difference between ideal profile and persona. So that's another question to be resolved. What is the difference between ideal profile and persona? I would take them to be the same thing, to be honest. But my main question in this regard is, do you think we're supposed to only use the information about endurance, about nerve, and about hand-eye coordination in answering question 2 and 3? Or is it like question 4, where we're looking at all the variables? Can you see what I'm asking?
Yes. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Pete. Hi, Bridget. Sorry.
It's
Sorry.
good. I think we should, based on our summary statistic for 2, we should identify the 3 main skills or abilities that required for each group, because we are looking for the ideal profile.
Yes. Okay. So that's true. Now you might be right. And oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I will certainly be very happy whichever way you choose to do it is up to you. But the visualization doesn't necessarily have to only be on that. You know, the thing that confuses me a little bit is question 1 just says endurance, nerve, and hand-eye. But I believe by the time we get to question 4, we're looking at the whole set of data. So it seems to me that this could be the whole set of data as well. And it does make it easier to discuss it. So I think, you know, the more I ponder it, the more I think it's easier to do 2 and 3 if you use all the columns of variables. You know, excuse me, sorry, but for example, a second ago, I ended up saying something along the lines of the fighting sports tend to be very high on endurance, very high on strength, very high on power. In fact, we could put it this way. Let me go back to my Excel file. Should be that one there, isn't it? Hopefully you can see the red now again. Yes, you can. Okay, so the fighting sports, we could focus on this difference. Now, this could be in contrast. So I did it against the non-fighting sports. So I would say in comparison with the non-fighting sports, let's just look at the biggest numbers we've got here. There, those ones. Let me color them in. In comparison with the non-fighting sports, the fighting sports tend to be very high on endurance, very high on strength, power, and flexibility, and nerve and durability. And also, but to a much lesser extent, higher levels of speed, agility, eye coordination, and analytical aptitude. Whereas if we limited ourselves just to endurance, nerve, and coordination, it's going to be a bit harder to say very much. But I do say I don't think the question is clear in that regard. So you could answer the question just by focusing on endurance, nerve, and eye coordination and say that the fighting sports are much higher on endurance and nerve and also higher, but not to the same degree, with eye-hand coordination. And, you know, that's at least what I would be thinking at the moment. It's up to you which way you do that. And then, you know, I would think, though, however you approach 2 is going to determine what you do in 3. Now, one remaining question for me at the moment is, what about persona versus profile? Has anyone got any thought on that? So, you know, when I'm unsure about these sort of things for marking, you know, I've only obviously been doing this for a little while, but I asked ChatGPT, what does it think? So I'm now going to say ideal profile versus persona. You'll notice actually it says describing, in part 3, it says describing the personas or profiles. So 2 says describe profile. 3 says describe profile or persona. So it does seem to me like it's essentially the same question asked twice. So let's just see if ChatGPT thinks there's a difference. Let me just go there. I trust you're all with me as to what I'm asking here. So I'm a bit puzzled. Question 2 says, use summary statistics and at least 3 visualizations to develop the ideal profile for an athlete participating in the fighting sports. And then use the summary statistics to provide, and the visualizations in 2, to provide a few paragraphs. I would take a few paragraphs to mean a paragraph for each group rather than multiple paragraphs for each group. That's how I would take it to be. But the thing that I'm a bit puzzled about here, now can I highlight or not? Yes, is the thing, is it not going to let me undo it? Is this personas profiles? And up here, ideal profile. What's the difference? Has anyone thought about that so far?
I feel like it's the same.
You think they're the same, Jason?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we got to think about how we do that then. Let me tell you what ChatGPT says. So it does come up with something useful. In fact, let me copy it for you right now into the chat. So you've got a copy if it's not too big. Did that fit? Might have been too big to send. Okay, well, let me copy it into my Word document and I'll email it to you, but just so you can see it for now. Okay, I'll just switch to, in fact, is that the wrong document? Let me try that again. Control P. Okay, let me switch back to the Word document. It was too much to send, it seems, sorry. There. Okay, so, and it says here, ideal profile. It's data-driven, attribute-focused, deals with the what the optimal athlete looks like statistically. Well, I think everything we do's got to be data-driven. So it says an ideal profile is created by analyzing summary statistics. Well, and then it says means. Well, means are summary statistics, e.g. means. So that's a bit of a disappointing answer. Distribution, so that's like box plots and histograms, which, you know, we haven't ever actually done that. But although we did, didn't we? When we did it in exploratory. When we opened up the data in exploratory, we automatically got histograms. Okay, distributions, correlations. And then it says what combination of attributes maximizes performance for this category of sport. Okay, high strength, high power, moderate agility. Okay, so maybe this is going to be the difference. No storytelling, no psychology, no personality, no biography. Great. I can't see it's going to be very different in the persona. But the persona is meant to be humanized. So we're not going to add any new data. It's just going to, as it says here, translate the profile into a description of a hypothetical athlete. So the way that this is normally done is by giving the hypothetical athlete a name, right? So, you know, what name are you going to use? Well, this time we don't have gender. It's not like anything's gender specific. So, you know, what I would tend to be doing in this case, I think, let me just run up here, is for my persona for the fighter. Am I in the right document for this? I think I am, aren't I? Where's my Greek statues? Yeah, okay, so that's what I'm going to do to get around that issue. So at least there's some difference. Okay, I didn't give you any of the names. Okay, let me get one of the names. So I did do this last night. Famous ancient Greek fighters. Well, I like Polydamas as the lion killer. Or we could go Heracles, even better. Heracles is a very famous name for a wrestler. So I'm going to let the name of my Heracles, you've probably even heard of him, or Hercules, he might be called, mightn't he? Heracles is probably the old name and Hercules is the modern name. So that's making it a bit humanized. I mean, it's an ancient name, Hercules, or I could call them Polydamas. And then I'm not worrying about whether they're male or female. I'm just choosing a famous person from history who happens to be male. So that is for my fighter. Now, then I want soccer, sport. So we could Australianize that. Who's that girl who's always getting in trouble? Or if you've seen the movie 300 Spartans, you could call him Leonidas. King Leonidas is another famous fighting type figure. For sport, you know, you could give them a famous name like David Beckham, if you've heard of them, or Pele, or I'm trying to think of what Australia's famous soccer captain is called. Female captain, soccer captain of Australia. Female. I should know. Sam Kerr. Okay, so you could use Sam Kerr. Because then there's a reason why you're choosing a female name. And then for skiing, most famous skiing athlete ever, or someone who's greatest downhill skier ever, since that's the most impressive sport out of the skiing, if it's not jumping. Greatest downhill skier, I meant to say. Okay, let's go for Anne-Marie as a famous skier, Anne-Marie. So you give them a name, and then you say things like athletes in this group, or the persona includes. Okay, so Anne-Maria is a skier. And then what did we find out about skiers? That they tend to be very high on endurance. They tend to be very high on flexibility and agility, etc. But we've got to be very careful here that we don't devolve into writing things that aren't based on the data itself. So we've got to somehow come up with a persona that is based on the data itself. And I would just be bouncing it around with AI until I got something that I was happy with. And I would probably keep going back and saying, I don't get the difference between the ideal profile and persona in this case, and see if it can't, get me to appreciate the difference. But I think the danger here is that, we're not supposed to be relying on anything else other than the data, but maybe that's something else. You could make the persona different by bringing in other information beyond the data itself. I mean, that's not ideal, but it might be a good way to draw a distinction between the persona and the profile. I'm going to think a bit more about that. And once I've done so, I'll record a separate video on that. I'm not very happy with my own answer, to be honest, at the moment, about question 2 versus question 3. That is, what's the difference? So I know that's bad news for you. The good news is I won't be expecting so much because I'm not even sure myself. So there's sort of an upside and a downside. But can I turn now to question 5, I think it is, which is the missing values for now. So the question is, where are we? Share. Explain how you would deal with any cells containing missing values. Are there any missing values in the data set? No, there are not. If you look very carefully at the spreadsheet, every cell has got a number or except for the sport column. So there isn't any missing information, but that doesn't mean that the way to answer it is to say that there isn't any. So let's look at another case. Let's look at missing values. Missing. So I've sent you something called Data 4000 2025 height 8 weight data with missing values. So let me just share that on the screen with you. And I'm going to make multiple copies of the sheet. So I'm going to say move or copy, create a copy, and I'll do it again. Move or copy, create a copy. I'll just do it 3 or 4 times. Okay, so I'm going to go to sheet. Wow, I'm going to call it 2. I don't know if I need them, but 4, sorry. And here's the original data. Okay, so one way that I could deal with missing values is simply to highlight any row with missing values and delete them. So that's one. Did I miss something there? I might have missed one. That's one way. Or did I miss another one? I mean, what did I do wrong there? How did I get that wrong? Okay, well, let me be more careful. 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, and I'm still going to try and delete them the same way, but this approach hopefully means I didn't miss any. So then I could just say delete. Really? You can't delete multiple rows that way? So maybe I need to actually select the whole row, sorry. So this time what I'm doing differently is I'm clicking on not the cell, but the row label, row 9. I'm clicking on the actual 9, the 12, the 13, the 22, the 30 and 31, 49. This is an ugly way to do it, but at least is relatively simple. And now I right click again on one of those row headings and I say delete, and that should fix it. So one approach is to delete all rows with any missing value. The downside is, of course, we've got less rows of data. So that's the downside of doing it that way. Okay, another approach would be, let's go to the third version, would be to delete any column. Delete any column with missing values. Now, in my case, it's only the weight variable, if you look at it. The only missing spots, I think, are those ones. So there's nothing else, so I could delete any column with missing values. In fact, in this case, rather than delete them, I will strike them through, and I'll change the color to make it as if it's nearly deleted. But obviously the downside of this equals, in this case, we lose those variables. So we're not going to be able to say anything about weight. Agreed? So I do need some more approaches. So we would, in other words, if we're interested in the relationship between height, age, and weight, we now wouldn't be able to say anything about weight. So that's a very unsatisfactory approach. Let me move or copy another one. So I'm going to get 5. Okay, and so this time what I'm going to do is I could replace missing values with something else. So with a guess, with an approximation, I'm going to replace it with the median. of that field. Replace missing values for a specific field with the median of that field. Okay, so let's freeze the top row, view, freeze panes, freeze the top row. And I'm going to come down here. I'm hoping this is going to work okay. I'm going to insert a column and write median. And then I'm going to ask for the median of all of that data. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with Excel trying to find the median when there's missing values. But it looks like it worked, but I will check it. Let me just go to another program and check that, what it's actually done. So I'm going to go Excel read D2 to D81. Okay, and then I'm going to get rid of the empties, which I'll treat them as nothing, and then I will ask for the median. Oops. Why did that not work? Median, empty. Oh, I forgot the dot. Yep, okay, so that is the median. It's just, that's the correct median. It's just skipped over the missing values. Yep. But having said that, I should have done that somewhere else. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to turn this median into a value. So I'm going to say Control C, and then I'm going to go paste special and paste values. And so now, if you have a look at that, that is now the median as a number. There's no formula. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new weight column, and I'm going to say if this is, now what's that going to be? Let's just find out what that is. Let's do it down here, equals if. How is it reading that blank? If it equals, let's just assume it's that. Let's just see how that works. Okay, so if you're blank, then I want you to put that median in there. And otherwise, so I'll go to the top now. If you are equal to an empty cell, which we're going to treat as just it's called a null string, null. If you've just got quotes with nothing in it, it's called a null string, N-U-L-L. If D2 equals the quotes, then is nothing, then I want you to use the median, and otherwise I want you to use the given value. So if I do that now and drag it all the way to the bottom, I ought to find, oh, why did that not work? Oh, because I didn't absolutely reference the D87, sorry. I need to absolutely reference the D87. No, that's not correct. Well, oh, it's not D87, you idiot, Jim. It is D84. How did I get that wrong? Oh, I've said D. Oh, because I still haven't got it absolutely referenced. Sorry. Absolute referenced. Now, that's still not the right button. D84. Okay, now I've got to absolutely reference. Now I double click, and now everywhere that we previously had a missing value, it's equal to the median. Right, and so now it's as though I don't have any missing values. So replace missing values for a specific field with the median of that field. So the positives of that are we don't lose any data. But the negative is the data is no longer accurate. So I personally don't like that approach. In fact, I don't like any of the approaches except the first one, where we delete the rows. I don't care what you do. It's up to you. I mean, there's nothing to do in this example because we don't have any missing values anyway. But in the next assignment and the one after, if there are missing values, I don't care what you do. You know, just because I don't like 2, or 2's the one I prefer, sorry, just because I think 3's obviously no good. 4 is what we're doing. I called it 5 in the end. So I'll go replace with median. So that's what we did for the third one. The second one was delete all rows. Well, that's the second sheet. That was our second approach. The third approach, or our second approach, but our third sheet is to delete the columns. And then we could do another approach. So, I mean, what I was trying to emphasize is I don't like this because it seems to me this potentially changes the answers. You know, let's imagine what we're studying here is whether the US government's federal aid program to Nigeria is making Nigeria a richer country or a poorer country. Right? Because ideally we want data on whether the programs are working. Well, once you start plugging in values for figures that you know, for fields whose values you don't know, you are distorting the answer. And maybe you're changing the answer. Maybe you're changing the answer qualitatively from the programs don't work to the programs work, or vice versa. You might be changing the answer qualitatively from them not working to them working. I don't know if I've said that the right way around, but it might be changing the conclusions that are being drawn in very substantial ways that are not understood by anybody who's downstream. So, you know, I've heard recently the Secretary of State in the United States being reprimanded by all these scholars who are saying that the programs you're slashing are going to result in 1 million deaths. Well, those 1 million deaths that they're coming up with is based upon a statistical analysis that probably began in a spreadsheet and in which they had to deal with this missing values question. And maybe the way that they dealt with the missing values question actually impacts the answer that the report ends up asserting, that the programs help or the programs don't help. So this next approach is based on regression and correlation and is more sophisticated than the median, but in my mind is no better. But let me just show you what we could do. So first of all, I'm going to get rid of all the cells again. So delete all the rows. So I'm going to come here, in fact. So I'm going to come to this one where I deleted all the rows, and I'm going to calculate correlations. So I'm going to go data analysis, correlation, and I'm going to say my input range is B1 to D71. So that's all the data. And then my output range, I'm going to put up here, I'll make it F1. And I'm asking for the correlations. Oh dear, F1. Well, what's up there? Some notes probably. Okay, so let me go down instead to F6. When I went to choose OK, it said you were going to be overwriting something. So I choose F6. Okay, and now I've got my correlations. And the point is, right, let's look at a scatter plot as well between height. Sorry, look at the correlations first. We know that they're always one on the main diagonal. So there's no real information content in that. What we're interested in is the off-diagonal correlations. We know that that one is the same. This is height with age is the same as age with height. That height with weight is the same as weight with height. And that age with weight is the same as weight with age. So that's the reason those figures aren't shown, because they're just the same as the ones underneath. right? Okay, so what am I now saying with the figures that interest me? That the correlation between height and age is 0.133. Pretty low correlation. Remember, correlations, this is a correlation matrix. Correlations are always between -1 and +1. So that's small, positive, but small. That's moderate and positive. And this one's relatively large. Now, remember what correlation being positive means. A positive correlation between X and Y implies that X and Y tend to move in the same direction. In other words, up together and down together. They tend to move in the same direction, up together and down together. So a person, what are we looking at? We're looking at height and weight, aren't we? That's what I'm interested in here. That's the big one. In other words, a person who's taller tends to be heavier, and a person who's heavier tends to be taller. And a person who's shorter tends to be lighter, and a person who's lighter is generally shorter. So height and weight are quite closely related. Let's see if we can visualize this in a simple scatter plot. So I highlight those two columns. I think that's going to work. I then click on Insert and I choose Charts and then Scatter. Okay, it's not a very good chart in Excel because it always shows you all this excessive white space. So let's fix that. I click on the axes and I say Format Axes, and I say, look, 145 for X is probably small enough. And looks like 190 as the maximum is probably big enough. So now you can see there's a pretty close correlation between height and weight. And I can get a measure of that by, this is something we haven't done before in this class, unfortunately. Usually I would have done it by now, but I've been from week 1 looking ahead at this assignment. And since we didn't really need this trick for this assignment, I didn't do it. But if I right click on one of those points, I can add a trend line. And then I can come over here and display the equation and display the R squared, which you may never have heard of if you've never done a course in statistics before. Okay, well, the R squared is not as high as I would like. It's only 51%. But what that's telling me is, in fact, let's first of all just show you that the R squared equals the correlation squared. Let me prove that. I grab that correlation and I square it, and I've got 0.5138. So that tells me that 51.38% of the variation in, what did I put on the vertical axis? Weight is explained by the variation in height. So let me ask you here. Yeah, I'm looking for weight. So I've got, let's label our axes. Look, when I click on the graph or visualization, chart design appears here. Now, when I click away, you can't see chart design anymore. So I click here, chart design, and I'm going to add some elements. I want axes labels. Let's have a look. So axes titles. Okay, so it didn't do it for me automatically the way I was hoping. Maybe none of them are going to. How disappointing. So I'm going to have to do it myself. So I'm then going to also add, now what if I did that way? Primary vertical. No, that was taking it away. Okay, we definitely want that. So axes titles. So I've now got a little title that I can fill in, and I'm going to say that's the weight, and that's the height. So this is another very common way for dealing with missing values. I don't like any of these methods that involve replacing the unknown values with other values. I think it can be used as a way to trick people, to change the results. But anyway, let's imagine I told you that I had a person in the data set whose weight was missing, but whose height was 185. What would you guess their weight to be? If you had to guess their weight, what would you guess their weight to be? Is anyone still here to answer? What you do is you go to the graph across the horizontal axis until you get to a height of 185. And then,
so it'll be around 90.
Yeah, around 90. You with me?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I mean, actually, the graph is relatively flat, but nevertheless, if I had someone around 148 centimeters tall, what would you guess their weight was?
Around 70.
Around 70, Jace. Here,
Yeah.
we could, right? So that's what that line is measuring. So this equation that you've got here can be used to predict the height. There's the equation. Let me rewrite it for you. I can say the height of a given member of the data set. So that says predicted or estimated. That's the meaning of the hat. The estimated or predicted height equals 0.55553x. X is the weight. Now hang on. I've got that the wrong way round. Sorry. Weight is on the vertical axis. I beg your pardon. Sorry. I'm predicting weight. I'm so used to predicting weight from height. No, so I'm in the usual situation. So I'm predicting weight from the height. So now you could do this. I can get the slope. That slope is minus 0.553. And my intercept is minus 9.1104. I could also get these from using the slope function. I could say that's my y variable that I'm trying to predict, although the mouse got out of control. That's my y variable that I'm trying to predict. And my x variable is the height. Now, I've chosen height and weight, not age and weight, because I had a high correlation between height and weight. So that's the reason I'm going to use height to predict the weight, not age to predict the weight. You know, I mean, I've got a correlation of 0.47 between age and weight compared to 0.71 between height and weight. So I can also say, give me the slope of the regression, it's called, between height and weight, and I'll get the same number. Although it's not negative. It wasn't negative. That's my mistake. Okay, that's a good check. That's why it's nearly always worth doing things two different ways, especially once you start to actually type things, because it's very easy just to make a slight error with your typing. Okay, now I didn't get the right intercept. I should have said, which one did I do? That is strange.
What does the intercept implies?
What does it mean?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come to that in 2 seconds. I did them the wrong way round. I need the y variable first. The y variable is the d. Then the x variable is the... That's better. So now we've got the same answer for both. Now let me explain it. If you have a look at that line there, right? This you could call it a trend line.
Yeah.
or line of best fit or regression line. Let's imagine for the moment, in fact, I will do it for you. Let me come down here and change the axes. Let me do it again. I clicked on the wrong part. I need to click on the actual axes. So here, these numbers. Now I've got that square, a rectangle around them. Now I've lost it. Do it again. See how there's a rectangle around the x-axis? Now I right click and go, and I seem to have stuffed it up in the process. Let's try again. Format axis. And let me change that to 0. Okay, now unfortunately the line didn't extend. I thought the line would extend. But if we extended that line, we'd hit whatever it was. What was the intercept? It was
-9.
-9. Okay. So if I could draw that, I'm not doing a good job, but it would be -9. So if you extended that line all the way to the vertical axis, it would intercept the vertical axis at -9. So what that's telling you, now we'll go back to what it was before. What that's telling you is that if the height happened to be 0, which doesn't make sense, obviously, but if the height happened to be 0, then the weight would be -9. Now, that doesn't make sense. Very often, the intercept doesn't make sense on its own. Let's bring these up. So the interpretation of the intercept, interpret the intercept, it would be if the height was 0, the weight, predicted weight, that is. If the height was 0, the predicted weight equals -0.911. Now, don't let that put you off. We can ask questions like this: if the height was 0, what would the weight be? But it doesn't mean even the question makes sense to begin with, because this is presumably people. It doesn't have to be, but let's assume it's university students. Well, they can't have a weight of 0. Oh, sorry, they can't have a height of 0. A human being with a height of 0 is not a human being. Agreed? So I wouldn't get too alarmed that the intercept doesn't make sense on its own. This is a very common thing with statistical models. But does that answer that question, Jason?
Yes.
I mean, maybe not completely to your satisfaction, but a main thing to remember is when we're doing this sort of thing, we're not usually doing it because we want to know what the intercept is or what the value of y is when x is 0. You know, in general, the intercept is the value of y when x equals 0, where, you know, height is my x variable and weight is my y variable. So what about the slope? The interpretation of the slope is for each extra unit of height, weight increases on average by 0.5553. Yep. And this means now also we can predict the height. I beg your pardon, we're predicting weight. Predict the weight for any height by plugging the height into the prediction equation. Because my prediction equation is that the weight equals 0.5553 times by the height minus 9.1. Let me just make that a tiny bit smaller. So that means I can come up here and go, I'll just add a column, predicted weight. And I say it's the slope, absolutely referenced, times by the height plus the intercept. So we need to practice. This is something you don't have to do for this assignment anyway, but we need to practice this a few times so that it becomes second nature, something that people can do very easily. So I forgot to absolutely reference the intercept. So I also need to put dollar signs around the intercept. And now I can double click and I've got a predicted height for any weight. And now let's copy that, copy, and go to regression and paste that here just as values. So there's no more formulas in it. You know, I needed to begin with, where did I go? The data where the rows had been deleted. So I needed to use a version of the data with the rows deleted in order to estimate my model called a regression model so that I could come up with the slope and intercept. But now I've done that, I can say replace the missing values with the regression predictions. So here's going to be my new weight variable. It's going to be if you are blank, then in that case, what I want you to do is grab the slope and multiply it by the height and then add the intercept. And otherwise, you can just return your own value. So I'm saying if the number, or sorry, if the entry in the weight column is blank, then the answer that or the value I want for the weight is the predicted value from the, it's called a regression model. And so that's what I've got here in the second argument. And otherwise, I want you just to return your usual value. So it's going to be return your value that you've currently got. Give me a prediction. Return your value that you've currently got. Give me a prediction. Give me a prediction. Return the value that you've currently got. Prediction, thank you. And so forth. So you will find, if you look carefully, that the values which weren't missing are the same as before, but anywhere there's a missing value, I'm not replacing it with the median. Instead, I'm replacing it with a predicted value based upon a formal way of generating the prediction using regression analysis. So the upside here is no lost data. No data is thrown out. But the downside is, again, that the missing values have been replaced. You know, there's a not all the data is accurate anymore, assuming it was previously. But this approach might be better. Approach might be better than the median and even the other approaches, as long as the correlation between, in this case, height and weight is very high. Let's say at least a correlation of 0.7. And the higher the better. As long as the correlation and provided there's nothing different about the relationship between height and weight for the data or for the rows with missing weights. You know, maybe there's something different about these people where the weights were missing. Let's imagine, for example, that they are unfortunately, and I say it with great pity or compassion and empathy, let's imagine, for example, that they were morbidly obese people who weighed twice as much as everybody else for their height in the data set. And maybe the reason the values are missing is because the person who was entering the data thought they must have been mistakes. So they didn't enter the data. So if the relationship between height and weight is different for the rows with missing data than it is for the other rows, then this approach is not a good approach. So we need two things for this approach to be good. One is the correlation's got to be high in the first place. Now this, as long as the correlation, this is equivalently the R squared. Because remember, the R squared is just the correlation squared, or equivalently the R squared has got to be high. And secondly, the relationship between the variable that we're predicting and the explanatory variable that we're using to generate the prediction, that relationship's got to be roughly the same for the observed data as for the missing data. Does that make some sense? I know that's a lot to take in.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, good. Peggy, Jason, before we wind up, only so I can get this video out to people, and then I'm quite happy to do this again tomorrow or Sunday. If anybody wants me to, we can revisit this after we've had a day to think about it. So if you want to do that, let me know. But have you guys got anything else you'd like to discuss or any questions you'd like to ask?
I think it's all good for now. There's a lot to take in,
digest.
So, yeah.
Well, there is, and that's why I want to get the video up for everybody as soon as possible. Peggy, did you have any other questions to ask at all?
So you already answered my question. Since you send the
okay, no worries. Well, listen, you've both got my mobile number, though, don't you?
I think I got your email. But that's pretty good.
You should also have, let me put it in here for you, especially if you send me an email and you want to say, Jim, I've sent you an email, please look. So there is my mobile, 0431126043.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And, you know, so you can always text me as well if you want to discuss anything. So you could even text me and say, Jim, is there any chance we can jump on Zoom? And as long as it's not Saturday, where I'm out for at least the first half of the day, I'll almost certainly be able to jump on Zoom if you want to discuss something. But what I suggest you do is now go away and have a think and, you know, come back with any questions you've got. And if you need an extension, you know, you can have up to 7 days, but not more, unfortunately. Anyway, I'm sorry again about all the trouble this week. I might have to buy a new laptop for next week and get my password sorted out. But either way, hopefully that doesn't happen again. And I thank you very much for your gracious understanding, and also Jason and Peggy and everybody else for turning up to the class afterwards on the Zoom, because I definitely would much prefer to do it with people here than doing it all by myself. It just doesn't seem the same. So I thank you both, and I will stop the recording and I will immediately upload it. And as soon as I've got the